All right, so we got some breaking news out of the United Kingdom where Prime Minister Liz Truss, the self-identified reincarnation of Margaret Thatcher, has resigned in disgrace after only 6 weeks as the Prime Minister of the UK, which I believe is the single shortest period that anybody has ever served for the Prime Minister position in the history of the country. And I'm actually pretty sure that the second place behind her for shortest tenure is this guy from like the early 20th century who literally died from tuberculosis a couple hundred days into his term. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details here from this Common Dreams breakdown in terms of what just happened. So they got a quote here saying, "Most disastrous PM in our history, UK Prime Minister Liz Truss resigns." So they say UK Prime Minister Liz Truss announced her resignation Thursday after just 44 days in office amid a worsening cost of living crisis and continued fallout over a scrapped plan to cut taxes for the ultra rich. So I just want to sit on that for just a minute and appreciate that this person, Liz Truss, genuinely tried to push sort of like this trickle-down economics approach, which has been a complete abject failure for decades now, since basically the Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher administrations. And she actually tried to push sort of her Trussonomics, or her version of Reaganomics, on this country, pushing austerity on working people while giving handouts to the wealthiest corporations and billionaires within the UK at a time where working people are getting absolutely shafted by inflation. And not only that, but her economic plan that she proposed basically just spiraled the UK economy down into the toilet, okay, to the point where it was like at its lowest point relative to the dollar. The pound was at the lowest point relative to the dollar in modern history, and you had all of these other issues with like pensions, just compounding issues on top of one another, and basically it led to a situation where her entire party started to jump ship and recognize that, this style of governance, this style of economics is just a complete fucking disaster, especially in a time like right now. But they continue here with a quote saying, "I recognize, given the situation, that I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party," Truss said in her speech. She says, "I've spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I'm resigning as the leader of the Conservative Party." They say that Truss is expected to leave office by the end of next week after the Tories hold a leadership election to select her replacement. Now, this is another important point to note here, right? Liz Truss was replacing Boris Johnson after he resigned in disgrace, and it seems like, which we'll get to here in a minute, that he might be making some sort of a reappearance, or at least an attempt at a reappearance. But this person, Liz Truss, was not even elected by the people of the UK. Okay, she was only elected by I believe around 160,000 dues-paying members within the Conservative Party. So she never really had a mandate from the people of the UK. And so obviously, this is not somebody who went in there with some surge of, a large base of support or anything like that. So she was already kind of working from behind in that sense. Obviously, she was a complete disaster in her governance, in her economic plan she was putting forward, but she really was never chosen by the people of the UK. She was chosen by a select group of elites, and that's exactly who she turned around and served, and that's exactly why her administration was such a fucking disaster. But we move on here to a quote from none other than the Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn, who has been absolutely shafted in a similar capacity to how the Democratic Party shafted Bernie Sanders multiple times. He was also similarly shafted by the Labour Party over in the UK, and he said, quote, the debacle of Liz Truss's short-lived premiership is a symptom of a broken economic system and a trashed democracy. We will continue to lurch from crisis to crisis, and ordinary people will pay the price until we finally build a society for the many, not the few." And he is 100% correct on this, and the Labour Party obviously completely fucked up by not allowing him to take up the leadership mantle and eventually try to legitimately make a push to be the Prime Minister of the UK. Would have been much better off with him at the helm than the current leadership that you have right now. But now we move on to a little bit of more background in terms of where she was at and why she was forced to resign in disgrace as she just did. So because of her economic policies, because of all of this political turmoil, you had so many people from her cabinet, her administration, that were resigning in mass, started to sort of compound on itself. And then you got to the point where she was so low in her approval rating that it got to negative 61% support. Okay, now this is, if you get into even more of the details here, this is some of the worst polling that I've ever seen of any leader in any country in my entire lifetime. Okay, so let's read some of the details here. They say, This is just a poll from literally just a couple days ago. They say, according to Redfield and Wilton Strategies poll released on Monday, Britain's new prime minister has a net approval rating of negative 61%, down 13 percentage points from a similar poll just last Thursday. They say only 9% of respondents approve of her overall performance, while 70% disapprove. Okay, only 9% approved of her performance. Okay, just for a point of reference in terms of how atrocious this number is, this is less than the amount of Americans percentage-wise that openly support Vladimir Putin. Okay, so this is like the worst type of support that you could possibly ask for. Okay, so her base of support, if she ever really had one to begin with, just completely collapsed from within. So I mean, she got to the point where she really had no choice. She was really trying to put up a fight. She was saying, I'm not a quitter, I'm somebody who's going to persevere and push forward. But obviously she really didn't have a choice at the end of the day. If only 9% of the country is supporting you, if that, and maybe that's even being a little bit generous to her, if you only have like less than 10% support, then yeah, I mean, nobody wants you to be there. Nobody wants you to continue governing in any capacity. So of course she was going to have to resign inevitably. Now, what's going to happen? Who's going to replace her? What are the next steps? Well, you already got a couple of familiar names here trying to throw their hat back in the ring. So here from Rajip Soilu, he says, breaking, Boris Johnson is expected to stand in the contest to replace Liz Truss as prime minister and believes it is a matter of national interest, according to the Times. Okay, so it looks like old Boris Johnson is going to be trying to throw his hat back in the ring after just resigning like literally a couple months ago in disgrace. Apparently this is like the best that the Conservative Party can come up with. I mean, maybe there's going to be sort of like an inter-party battle now. Other people are going to try to wrangle their way to the top of the Conservative Party, the top of the Tories right now. Boris Johnson, obviously his name recognition, his familiarity within the party leadership structure, maybe that will help him, maybe it will hurt him. I honestly don't really know. There's also that guy Rishi Sunak, who was kind of in the running with Liz Truss in terms of who was going to take up the leadership mantle after Boris Johnson resigned. So maybe he's going to try to make another push. But honestly, at this point, it's just a wash. I don't think it really matters which name you put in. The Conservative Party within the UK is just absolutely imploding and embarrassing itself right now. And this has led to calls from the opposition party, led by this corrupt motherfucker, Keir Starmer, saying that they need to go for an immediate general election. Now, on this specific point, he's 100% right, because again, Liz Truss was not elected by the people of the United Kingdom. She was elected by a small group of, wealthy elites, disproportionately white men, and she was put there by that small coalition of people. She wasn't elected. She didn't have a general mandate among the people. So, of course, if your party, the Conservatives, collapsed under Boris Johnson, collapsed within 6 weeks under Liz Truss's leadership, yes, you need a fucking general election, right? Now, I don't know the specific details in terms of what would actually need to happen to make this general election happen. I'm pretty sure they get like a grace period of like a week, which is how long Liz Truss is saying that she's going to stay on board. So I guess the Tories have like a week to sort of sort their shit out and fill that leadership position once again. But regardless, I mean, if you have had this much of a cataclysmic implosion within your party and within your country, you need fresh leadership, right? You need to hold a general election. You need to put it back to the actual people of the UK to have a voice right now. Now, the reason why Keir Starmer wants to have this general election, and the reason why the Tories do not want to have this general election right now, is because if you look at the polling data, they say that Labour is now leading the Tories by 36 points in a new poll, in a fresh blow to Truss. So clearly this was one of the final knockout blows, but 36-point lead for the Labour Party over the Tories. I mean, could you even imagine if we ever had that here in the United States, right? I mean, we're constantly working within the margins, and we're saying, oh, in the generic, the generic ballots, Republicans have a 4-point lead, or Democrats have a 4-point lead, whatever. Usually it doesn't get too much ahead of like 8% or 10% would really be like a large amount in terms of like generic polling in this country. We're talking about a 36-point lead. Could you even imagine if either party in the United States ever had that? I mean, they have throughout American history, obviously. Like, you go back to the days of FDR, or even like Ronald Reagan had significant support around this country at the time. But I mean, 36-point lead is just absolutely gigantic. And so if they were to hold a general election right now, in all likelihood, the Labour Party would just storm in and go in with an overwhelming victory. So, I mean, there you go. Liz Truss resigning in disgrace after just 6 weeks in office. Okay, a complete abject failure. Again, just a reminder in terms of, how much of a joke neoliberal trickle-down economics or Trussonomics or whatever you want to call them actually are. are, extremely unpopular, going to be completely dysfunctional. I mean, we're sitting at a time now with record inequality, both in the United States and the UK. And, obviously with this inflation that has been crushing average working class people, you can't just continue to give handouts to the wealthy and continue to push austerity on working class people and expect that that's going to be some sort of a sustainable leadership model. It's just not. And we saw a perfect demonstration here with Liz Truss in terms of how much of a failure those policies can actually be in practice, even in just such a short time. I mean, she was in office for such a short time that you had people who set up basically this comparison where they literally put a head of lettuce on a table with a live stream, and there was this big joke around whether or not Liz Truss would be able to last longer than a head of lettuce sitting on this live stream before it would actually end up rotting. And it turns out that the head of lettuce ended up winning that contest. So, I mean, this is absolutely hilarious. You'd love to see it. Fuck Liz Truss. She never belonged in this leadership position in the first place. And honestly, I'm very glad that she's on her way out. But again, the people of the UK at a time like this, when the Conservative Party, the Tories, are so wildly unpopular, they've been such an abject disaster over the last couple of years, they deserve to have a general election. And so that's what they should be pushing for immediately.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying